The abandoned parking lot shimmered under the merciless Phoenix sun as Sarah Miller walked to her car, keys jangling in her trembling hand. That's when she heard it, a faint whimper coming from beneath a rusted sedan. Crouching down, the asphalt burning through her thin slacks, Sarah peered into the shadows. Two amber eyes stared back, filled with a terror she recognized all too well from her own mirror. A German shepherd, ribs protruding, fur matted with dried blood, belly swollen with pregnancy. The dog's scarred muzzle quivered, caught between fear and desperate hope. "Hey there," Sarah whispered, her throat tightening. "It's okay." The dog inched forward, every movement betraying pain, yet something beyond instinct pushing her toward Sarah. When their eyes locked, Sarah felt it. Recognition between two broken souls standing at the edge of either salvation or destruction. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sarah Miller hadn't always been a woman who jumped at shadows. Before moving to Phoenix, before the divorce, before everything fell apart, she'd been a combat nurse in Iraq. Steady hands and steelier nerves. But 3 tours and too many broken bodies had left her with nightmares that medication couldn't touch, and a marriage that couldn't survive her return. Now, at 32, she worked as an accountant in a small firm downtown, crunching numbers in a beige cubicle, her purple heart gathering dust in a drawer. Her 1-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex on the east side was all she could afford after Mike took the house and most of their savings. The divorce papers had cited irreconcilable differences, but what they really meant was that Mike couldn't handle her night terrors, her hypervigilance, the way she flinched at backfiring cars. The July heat in Phoenix was its own kind of battlefield, merciless and unrelenting. Sarah often thought the dry, scorching air matched the hollow feeling in her chest. Her neighbors were mostly strangers, faces she passed in the narrow hallways with tight smiles and eyes that slid away. Except for Eleanor Whitman in 4B. At 78, Eleanor was a fixture in the complex, her silver hair always perfectly coiffed despite the heat, her posture remarkably straight except for when her arthritis flared and she needed her wooden cane. For 3 years since her husband Frank's death, Eleanor had lived alone, her days marked by the ticking of an antique grandfather clock and the fading photographs that lined her walls. "Morning, dear," Eleanor would say, her voice warm with the Tennessee accent she never lost, despite 50 years in Arizona. Sarah always nodded back, sometimes pausing for small talk about the weather or the broken ice machine in the lobby. She noticed how Eleanor's hands trembled slightly when she collected her mail, how she sometimes stood in her doorway a beat too long, as if reluctant to return to her empty apartment. Sarah recognized loneliness when she saw it. It was like looking in a mirror. Sometimes, on the worst nights when her memories ambushed her, Sarah would hear Eleanor's television through the thin walls. Game shows, mostly. The audience laughter a poor substitute for human connection. Once she'd heard Eleanor talking, not on the phone, just talking, to Frank's photo. Sarah never mentioned it. Some privacies deserved respect. Building manager Martha Allen had warned Sarah when she moved in that the complex wasn't one of those social places where everybody's in everybody's business. Martha ran the building with rigid efficiency, her clipboard perpetually in hand, her eyes sharp for any lease violations. "Keep to yourself, pay on time, no pets, no problems," had been her mantra. Sarah had been fine with that arrangement, until now, until a German shepherd with desperate eyes and a swollen belly had looked at her like she was the last hope in a world that had shown nothing but cruelty. The decision to help the pregnant German shepherd wasn't really a decision at all for Sarah. Something in those amber eyes bypassed her usual caution, reaching straight into the part of her that remembered how to care deeply. With slow, deliberate movements, she extended her hand, palm up, and waited. "It's okay, girl," she murmured, her voice low and steady, like she used to use with shell-shocked soldiers. "I won't hurt you." The dog sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. She took one tentative step forward, then stopped, her ears flattening against her head when a car door slammed somewhere in the lot. Sarah remained motionless, ignoring the burn of the asphalt through her slacks. Minutes passed in a standoff of trust versus experience. Finally, the dog inched close enough that Sarah could see the extent of her injuries. Scars crisscrossed her muzzle, one ear was partially missing, and patches of fur were gone, leaving raw skin exposed to the elements. Most alarming was her distended belly, tight with the promise of puppies that would soon need a safe place to enter the world. "You're coming with me," Sarah decided, slowly removing her cardigan despite the heat. She held it open, creating a makeshift harness. "We'll figure out the rest later." Somehow the dog understood. With a soft whimper that might have been relief, she allowed Sarah to gently wrap the cardigan around her, flinching only slightly at the contact. The elevator in Sarah's building was perpetually out of order, so she carefully guided the dog up 3 flights of stairs, murmuring encouragement with each pained step. Mrs. Gonzalez from 3A peeked out as they passed, her eyes widening at the sight of the bedraggled animal. "Just for tonight," Sarah said, more to herself than her neighbor. Mrs. Gonzalez merely shook her head and closed her door. Inside her apartment, Sarah created a nest of old towels in the corner of her living room, then filled her largest mixing bowl with water. The dog, she needed a name, Sarah realized, approached the water cautiously as if expecting it to be taken away. "Drink," Sarah encouraged. "It's all yours." As the dog lapped thirstily, Sarah made 2 calls, one to her office saying she'd be late tomorrow, and one to the only veterinarian she knew, Dr. Michael Evans, who had treated her friend's cat last year and had given Sarah his card just in case. "It's an emergency," she told the receptionist. "A pregnant German shepherd, severely malnourished and injured." Dr. Evans agreed to see them first thing in the morning. Sarah spent the night on her sofa, watching the dog sleep fitfully, wondering what she had gotten herself into, yet feeling more purposeful than she had in months. Morning brought a knock on her door. Sarah opened it to find Eleanor Whitman standing there, her silver hair neatly pinned, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Mrs. Gonzalez mentioned you brought home a dog," Eleanor said without preamble. "I thought you might need these." She held out a bag containing dog food, a collar, and a leash. Sarah blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "Frank and I had shepherds for 40 years, Eleanor said, a sad smile touching her lips. "Magnificent animals. The last one, Kaiser, passed a month before Frank did. Sometimes I think the loneliness took them both." She peered around Sarah to where the dog lay on the towels. "Oh, the poor dear," she breathed. "She's expecting." "I'm taking her to the vet this morning," Sarah explained, accepting the bag gratefully. Eleanor nodded. "I'll go with you. You'll need an extra pair of hands." When Sarah began to protest, Eleanor waved it away. "I've got nothing but time, dear. And she needs all the friends she can get." At Dr. Evans's clinic, the full extent of the dog's condition became clear. The veterinarian, a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples, performed a thorough examination while Sarah and Eleanor waited anxiously. "She's been through hell," Dr. Evans said bluntly when he finished. "Multiple fractures that healed improperly, cigarette burns, evidence of malnutrition and repeated beatings, and she's been used for breeding repeatedly. I'd guess this is at least her 3rd or 4th litter." Sarah felt sick. "Will she be okay? And the puppies?" Dr. Evans's expression was grave. "She's severely anemic and dehydrated. The pregnancy is high risk. I'm detecting 7 puppies, which is a lot for her weakened state." He hesitated. "The treatment she needs won't be cheap, Ms. Miller." "How much?" Sarah asked, mentally calculating her savings. The figure Dr. Evans quoted made her blood run cold. It was more than 2 months' rent. "I'll figure it out," she said firmly. "She has a microchip," Dr. Evans added, his expression darkening. "Registered to a James Reynolds. By law, I should contact him." "The man who did this to her?" Sarah's voice rose. "No, absolutely not." "I understand your concern," Dr. Evans said gently, "but legally, this is animal abuse," Eleanor interjected, her frail hand surprisingly strong as she gripped her cane. "I've seen enough in my 78 years to recognize cruelty when I see it. Call this Reynolds fellow if you must, but also call the police." Dr. Evans considered them both, then nodded. "I'll make some calls. Meanwhile, she needs a name for our records." Sarah looked at the dog, who was watching her with those intelligent amber eyes. Despite everything, there was still a light in them, a resilience that refused to be extinguished. "Luna," she decided. "Her name is Luna." The next week was a blur of veterinary visits, sleepless nights, and mounting bills. Luna slowly gained strength with a regimen of special food, supplements, and careful monitoring. She remained wary of sudden movements but began to wag her tail when Sarah entered the room, a small victory that brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Eleanor became a fixture in Sarah's apartment, sharing her decades of knowledge about German shepherds and bringing homemade broths that Luna eagerly accepted from her gnarled hands. "She's smart as a whip," Eleanor observed on the 5th day, watching Luna carefully arrange her towels before lying down. "Shepherds always are. Frank used to say they think they're smarter than people, and he wasn't wrong." Sarah had just started to believe things might work out when Martha Allen knocked on her door, clipboard in hand, expression severe. "Pets are strictly prohibited," she announced, eyeing Luna with disapproval. "Section 8, paragraph 3 of your lease agreement. You have 48 hours to remove the animal or face eviction." "She's not just an animal," Sarah protested, feeling panic rise in her chest. "She's pregnant. She's been abused." "Not my problem," Martha interrupted. "Rules are rules. 48 hours, Ms. Miller." As the door closed, Sarah sank onto the sofa, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to move, especially not with Luna's mounting medical bills. But the thought of surrendering Luna to a shelter, where a pregnant, abused dog would likely be euthanized, was unbearable. "We'll find a way," she promised Luna, who had come to rest her head on Sarah's knee, those amber eyes full of trust that made Sarah's throat tighten. She just had no idea what that way would be. The eviction notice hung over Sarah like a storm cloud as she tried to make sense of her options. Luna's condition was improving under Dr. Evans's care, but she still required daily medication and special food that consumed what little remained of Sarah's savings. The thought of finding a new apartment that would accept a pregnant German shepherd, with her own credit score in shambles after the divorce, it seemed impossible. "You're not going to like what I have to say," Dr. Evans told her during Luna's checkup on day 8, his kind eyes troubled. "I've reported the abuse to animal control, as required by law. They've contacted James Reynolds." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "And?" "He wants the dog back." Dr. Evans's expression hardened. "Claims she ran away, denies any abuse. He's threatening legal action." "He can't have her," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "You've seen what he did to her." "I've documented everything," Dr. Evans assured her. "But these cases can be complicated, without witnesses to the actual abuse." Sarah left the clinic feeling the walls closing in. She had 40 hours left before eviction. A man who had tortured Luna was demanding her return, and her bank account was approaching zero. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, each step felt heavier than the last. She found Eleanor waiting outside her door, leaning on her cane, a determined expression on her lined face. "I heard Martha giving you the ultimatum," the older woman said without preamble. "Pack your things and Luna's. You're moving in with me." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Whitman, I couldn't possibly—" "Eleanor," she corrected firmly. "And yes, you can. My apartment has 2 bedrooms. Frank's study has been sitting empty for 3 years." Her voice softened. "It's not charity, Sarah. That dog needs you, and frankly, I could use the company." There was a vulnerability in Eleanor's eyes that stopped Sarah's protest. She recognized it, the same look she sometimes caught in her own reflection, loneliness that had hardened into solitude, worn like armor. "Only until I figure something out," Sarah conceded. Eleanor smiled, the deep wrinkles around her eyes crinkling. "Of course, dear. Now let's get moving before that battle-axe Martha starts measuring for new drapes." Moving took less time than Sarah expected. Her life had been pared down after the divorce: clothes, books, a few kitchen essentials, and the medical supplies for Luna. Eleanor directed the process with surprising energy, pointing out where things should go in the spacious apartment that still held traces of a long life shared with Frank. As Sarah arranged her meager toiletries in the guest bathroom, she noticed the care that had gone into the space: fresh towels, new soap, even a small vase of desert flowers. Eleanor had been preparing for her arrival. "Frank always said a house needs people to be a home," Eleanor explained when Sarah thanked her. "This place has been too quiet for too long." That night, after settling Luna on a plush dog bed that Eleanor had mysteriously produced from storage, Kaiser's, she'd said simply, the 2 women sat on Eleanor's balcony, watching the sunset paint the Phoenix skyline in shades of orange and pink. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said, nodding toward Luna, who was resting with her head on her paws, watching them through the sliding door. "What do you see in those eyes that made you risk everything?" Sarah considered the question, realizing no one had asked why she'd taken in Luna, only questioned her decision. "Recognition?" she finally said. "When you've been broken, you can see it in others." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "Frank used to say that wounds recognize wounds. It's how healing begins." She paused, studying Sarah's face in the fading light. "You were a nurse, weren't you?" "Before." "How did you know?" Sarah asked, startled. "The way you handle Luna. Efficient but gentle. Professional, but there's heart in it." Eleanor smiled. "My sister was a nurse. You have the same hands." There was something about the quiet evening, the gentle acceptance in Eleanor's voice, that loosened something in Sarah's chest. Before she knew it, she was talking about Iraq, about the things she'd seen, about the nightmares that still woke her, about Mike leaving when she couldn't be the woman he'd married anymore. Eleanor listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her eyes occasionally drifting to Luna as if drawing a parallel. "Loyalty," she said, when Sarah finally fell silent. "That's what's missing these days. People think it's an outdated concept, but it's everything." She gestured toward Luna. "That dog, despite everything humans have done to her, is still willing to trust, to be loyal." Puts most people to shame. The next morning there was a sharp knock at the door. Sarah opened it to find a uniformed police officer and a thin man with cold eyes whom she instantly knew was James Reynolds. "That's my property," Reynolds said immediately, pointing at Luna, who had scrambled behind the sofa at the sight of him, her entire body trembling. "I have papers." "She's not property," Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "She's a living being you abused." The officer, whose nameplate read Peterson, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, legally speaking, dogs are considered property in Arizona. If Mr. Reynolds can prove ownership—" "Then he can also explain these," interrupted Dr. Evans, appearing behind them in the hallway, holding a thick folder. "Full documentation of systematic abuse, X-rays showing multiple healed fractures, cigarette burns. Evidence of malnutrition and forced breeding." Detective Peterson's expression changed as he leafed through the file. "Mr. Reynolds, did you inflict these injuries?" "That mutt was clumsy," Reynolds snapped, "always getting into trouble. I took care of it, fed it." "Her," Sarah corrected, anger flaring. "Luna is a her, not an it." Eleanor had emerged from her bedroom, moving to stand beside Sarah. Despite her age and frail appearance, there was steel in her spine as she faced Reynolds. "Young man," she said, her voice steady, "I've lived long enough to recognize evil when it's standing on my doorstep. You will not take this dog." Reynolds' face darkened. "You can't—" "Actually," Detective Peterson interjected, closing the file, "based on Dr. Evans' documentation, I'm opening an animal cruelty investigation. Mr. Reynolds, you'll need to come to the station to answer some questions." Reynolds pointed a finger at Sarah. "This isn't over. That dog is valuable breeding stock." "I'll be back with a lawyer." As Detective Peterson escorted Reynolds away, Sarah felt her legs trembling. She sank onto the sofa, and Luna cautiously emerged to press against her, still shaking. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, stroking Luna's scarred head. "He can't hurt you anymore." But the look in Reynolds' eyes told her this was far from over. In the days that followed, Luna began to show small signs of trust. She stopped hiding food under the sofa, no longer flinched when Sarah raised a hand to stroke her, and even allowed Eleanor to examine her swollen belly, the puppies now moving visibly beneath her stretched skin. "Any day now," Eleanor predicted on the morning of day 14. "See how she's nesting?" Kaiser's mate did the same thing before her litter. Dr. Evans confirmed Eleanor's prediction during their appointment that afternoon. "Her blood work is improving, but I'm still concerned about her overall condition for delivery," he said, reviewing Luna's chart. "The ultrasound shows at least 7 puppies. That's a lot for a dog in her weakened state." Sarah felt a chill. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we should be prepared for complications. She might need a C-section, which would mean—" "More money," Sarah finished quietly. Dr. Evans nodded sympathetically. "I've done what I can to reduce the costs, but a cesarean with post-operative care for her and 7 puppies." He named a figure that made Sarah's stomach drop. "I'll figure it out," she said automatically, though she had no idea how. That night, Sarah sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, bills spread before her, trying to make the numbers work. Her savings were depleted, her credit cards maxed out, and her next paycheck wouldn't cover half of what Luna might need. "Worrying doesn't add $1 to your pocket or an hour to your day," Eleanor observed, setting a cup of tea in front of Sarah. "My Frank used to say that." "Your Frank sounds like he was a wise man," Sarah smiled weakly. "Wise enough to put away a little something for a rainy day." Eleanor sat down across from Sarah, placing a bank book on the table. "Frank and I saved all our lives for a trip to Europe. We were going to see Paris, Rome, London, all the places we'd only read about." Sarah looked at the bank book, then at Eleanor in confusion. "Frank died before we could go," Eleanor continued softly, "and at my age, traveling alone lost its appeal. That money's been sitting in the bank for 3 years, gathering dust instead of memories." "Eleanor, no," Sarah protested, understanding dawning. "I can't take your savings." "Who said anything about taking?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "It's an investment. In life. In second chances." She pushed the bank book toward Sarah. "Frank would have approved." "He always had a soft spot for strays. That's how I ended up with him, you know." Before Sarah could respond, Luna let out a soft whine from her bed. Both women turned to see the German shepherd panting, her sides heaving. "It's time," Eleanor said, already reaching for her phone. "Call Dr. Evans. Tell him we're on our way." As Sarah dialed with shaking fingers, she caught Eleanor whispering to Luna, "Hang on, sweet girl. Help is coming. You're not alone anymore." And in that moment, Sarah realized neither was she. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Luna's due date approached. Sarah had accepted Eleanor's generosity with reluctance that gave way to profound gratitude, allowing Dr. Evans to schedule the necessary pre-delivery care. Each morning began with medication hidden in Luna's special food, followed by gentle exercises Dr. Evans had recommended to strengthen her for the delivery. Eleanor proved to be an unexpected blessing, her decades of experience with German shepherds providing insights no veterinary textbook could offer. "See how she's pawing at the blankets?" she pointed out on day 16. "She's practicing, making a nest for her babies." Sarah had taken a week of unpaid leave from her accounting job, explaining the situation to her supervisor, a stern woman named Janet, who had surprisingly softened at the mention of the pregnant, abused dog. "My sister volunteers at a shelter," she'd said, unexpectedly approving the time off. People can be monsters, but that small reprieve was ending. On day 17, Sarah returned to work, her phone never far from reach in case Luna needed her. The separation anxiety was mutual. Luna stood at the window as Sarah left, her amber eyes following until Sarah was out of sight. "She'll be fine," Eleanor assured her by text throughout the day. "We're having a house hunters marathon. She seems partial to the beachfront properties." By the third day back at work, Sarah's anxiety had begun to fade, until her lunch break when she checked her phone to find 3 missed calls from Eleanor and a text. "Call me immediately." Sarah's heart stuttered as she dialed, scenarios of complications flashing through her mind. "It's not Luna," Eleanor said immediately upon answering. "She's fine." But there's a situation. The situation had arrived in the form of certified mail, papers from James Reynolds's attorney demanding the return of his property and threatening legal action if Luna wasn't surrendered within 48 hours. The letter cited Arizona property laws and included documentation of Reynolds' ownership via the microchip registration. "I've already called Detective Peterson," Eleanor said. "He's on his way over with Dr. Evans." By the time Sarah arrived back at the apartment, having left work early despite Janet's disapproval, a small gathering had assembled in Eleanor's living room. Detective Peterson stood by the window, his expression troubled as he reviewed the legal papers. Dr. Evans sat on the sofa, his medical files open beside him, while a slim woman in a crisp suit introduced herself as Meredith Wong from the Arizona Animal Defense League. "I've seen cases like this before," Mrs. Wong explained, accepting the tea Eleanor offered. "Unfortunately, the law often treats animals as property first, sentient beings second." "So Reynolds could actually get her back?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "After what he did to her?" "The abuse case is proceeding," Detective Peterson said, "but it's complicated. Reynolds claims any injuries were pre-existing or accidental, without direct witnesses. The medical evidence is clear," Dr. Evans interjected firmly. "To medical professionals, yes," Ms. Wong agreed. "But courts often require a higher standard for animal abuse cases." She paused, studying the documents. "There is one thing, though. This microchip information seems incomplete." Dr. Evans frowned, moving to examine the papers over her shoulder. "You're right. The registration date is only from 2 years ago, but the chip itself appears to be older." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, hope flickering. "It means," Mrs. Wong said slowly, "that there might be more to Luna's story than we know." Detective Peterson took the documents. "I'll run a deeper check on the chip's serial number. If it was registered to someone else before Reynolds, it could change everything." Luna, seemingly oblivious to the discussion that would determine her fate, lay in her bed near the air conditioning vent, her swollen belly rising and falling with each breath. Sarah knelt beside her, gently stroking her scarred head. "We won't let him take you," she promised softly. "Whatever it takes." After the impromptu meeting dispersed, with promises of further investigation and legal strategies, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. She sat on the guest room floor beside Luna's bed, scrolling through her phone, researching animal custody laws until her eyes burned. A soft knock on the door interrupted her research. Eleanor entered, dressed in a faded floral robe, 2 mugs of tea in her gnarled hands. "Chamomile," she said, offering one to Sarah. "My mother's cure for a troubled mind." "Did it work?" Sarah asked, accepting the steaming mug. "Not really," Eleanor admitted with a small smile, "but it gives your hands something to do while you worry." They sat in companionable silence, the only sound Luna's soft breathing and the distant hum of the city outside. "I never told you how Frank died," Eleanor said suddenly. "Everyone assumes it was his heart or cancer, the usual suspects at our age." Sarah looked up, surprised by the change in topic. "It was a home invasion," Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. 3 men broke in, looking for valuables. Frank confronted them. She paused, her gaze distant with memory. "Kaiser, our last shepherd, tried to protect him. They shot Kaiser first, then Frank when he knelt beside him." "Eleanor, I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, horrified. "The police never caught them," Eleanor said. "But that's not why I'm telling you this. After it happened, I was lost, broken. I thought about selling the apartment, moving to a retirement community, giving up." She looked at Luna. "Then one day, about 6 months after, I was at the park. A young woman was there with a German shepherd who looked so much like Kaiser. I must have been staring because she came over, and the dog immediately put his head in my lap, like he knew." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "That moment saved me. That connection." She reached out to gently stroke Luna's ear. "When I saw you bringing her in that first day, I recognized something. Not just in her eyes, but in yours. 2 souls in need of saving." She met Sarah's gaze. "We're not giving up. Not on Luna, and not on you." The next morning brought unexpected news. Sarah's phone rang as she was preparing Luna's medication. "Ms. Miller? Detective Peterson? We found something about Luna's chip." Sarah put the phone on speaker so Eleanor could hear. "The chip wasn't originally registered to Reynolds," the detective explained. "It was registered to the Montana Search and Rescue Unit. Luna's real name is Athena. She was a certified search and rescue dog who went missing during a landslide recovery operation 3 years ago." Sarah stared at Luna in astonishment. "Search and rescue?" "One of their best, according to the handler I spoke with," Peterson continued. "They thought she'd been killed in a secondary slide. They're sending her records and training certificates. If this is really their Athena, Reynolds has no legal claim. She'd be considered stolen property." As Sarah processed this revelation, her phone pinged with an email notification. It was from her office, specifically from Janet's assistant. The subject line read simply, "Termination Notice." The body of the email was brief and clinical. Due to excessive absences and declining performance, Sarah's position was being eliminated, effective immediately. Her final paycheck would be mailed, minus the cost of company property that needed to be returned. Sarah stared at the screen, a hollow feeling spreading in her chest. No job meant no income. No income meant no way to repay Eleanor, no way to cover Luna's ongoing medical costs, no way to care for 7 puppies that would soon arrive. "Bad news?" Eleanor asked, noting Sarah's expression. "I've been fired," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Too many absences because of Luna." Eleanor's face darkened with indignation. "Those heartless bean counters, after everything you've—" "It's okay," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with the realization that it was somehow okay. That job was slowly killing me anyway. Every day in that cubicle felt like I was disappearing a little more. Eleanor studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Frank always said when one door closes, kick another one down." "I'm pretty sure that's not the original saying," Sarah said, a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "Frank wasn't big on being original. He was big on results." Their moment of levity was interrupted by the doorbell. Sarah opened it to find Detective Peterson, accompanied by a tall, middle-aged man with weathered skin and a military bearing. "Ms. Miller, this is Robert Callahan from Montana Search and Rescue," Peterson introduced them. "He's flown in to verify if Luna is indeed their missing Athena." Callahan's eyes were already fixed beyond Sarah, widening with recognition and emotion. "It's her," he said, his voice rough. "My God, it's really her." Luna, who had been napping, raised her head at the sound of the unfamiliar voice. She stared at Callahan, head tilted in what Sarah now recognized as her listening pose. Then, slowly, her tail began to wag. "Athena," Callahan called softly, kneeling down. "Athena, come." Luna, or Athena, struggled to her feet, her pregnant belly making movement awkward. She approached Callahan cautiously, sniffing his extended hand. Then, with a small whine, she pressed her head against his palm. "She remembers," Callahan said, tears welling in his eyes. "After everything, she remembers." The reunion was bittersweet, as Callahan examined Luna's scars with barely contained fury. Who did this to her? She was a hero. She saved 11 lives in the landslide before she disappeared. As Detective Peterson explained about James Reynolds, Sarah felt a strange hollowness forming in her chest. Of course, Luna, Athena, had a past, a purpose, people who loved her, people who had a legitimate claim to her. People who could probably provide better care than an unemployed former combat nurse with PTSD and mounting debts. "She's pregnant," Sarah said quietly. "Due any day now. She'll need special care." Callahan nodded, still stroking Luna's head. "Our unit has a full-time veterinary team. We can take her back to Montana as soon as she's cleared for travel." Take her back to Montana. The words echoed in Sarah's mind like a physical blow. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Eleanor interjected, noting Sarah's stricken expression. "Athena, Luna, whatever her name is, she's in a delicate condition. No one's taking her anywhere until those puppies are safely delivered and she's recovered." Callahan looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded after glancing at Luna's swollen belly. "Of course. I'll stay in Phoenix until she's ready." After he left with promises to return the next day with more documentation, Sarah sat beside Luna, fighting back tears. "She's not even really mine," she whispered to Eleanor. "I've lost my job, and now I'm going to lose her too." Eleanor settled into her armchair with a sigh. "You know what Frank would say about that kind of talk? He'd say, 'The only thing that's certain is that nothing is certain.' Life has a way of surprising you, Sarah. Sometimes cruelly, yes, but sometimes," she gazed at Luna, "sometimes beautifully." Before Sarah could respond, Luna suddenly stiffened, a low whine escaping her throat. She stood awkwardly, turning in circles, then lay down again, panting heavily. "Eleanor?" Sarah called, alarm rising in her voice. "I think it's time." Time seemed to collapse as Luna's labor began. Sarah's training took over, her hands steady, despite the panic fluttering in her chest. She called Dr. Evans while Eleanor prepared the whelping area they'd set up in the living room, a kiddie pool lined with clean blankets, heating pad at the ready, medical supplies organized with military precision. "Her temperature dropped this morning," Sarah reported when Dr. Evans answered. "Contractions about 7 minutes apart. She's panting heavily and nesting." "I'm on my way," Dr. Evans replied. "Keep her calm. Remember what we discussed. First-time mothers can take anywhere from 6 to 24 hours to deliver." Eleanor moved with surprising agility for her age, bringing fresh towels and warm water. Her face was set with determination, but Sarah caught the worry in her eyes. They both knew Luna's weakened condition made this delivery dangerous. "Should we call Callahan?" Sarah asked, gently stroking Luna's heaving sides. "Later," Eleanor decided. Too many people will stress her now. She needs calm. Luna looked up at Sarah with wide, frightened eyes, a whimper escaping between pants. Despite everything she'd endured, the abuse, the abandonment, the pain, this was new territory, and Sarah could see the fear plainly. "It's okay, sweet girl," she murmured, settling beside the kiddie pool. "We're right here. You're not alone." Dr. Evans arrived within 20 minutes, medical bag in hand, face grim with purpose. After a quick examination, he frowned. "She's definitely in labor, but something's not right. The first puppy should be presenting by now." He performed an ultrasound, his expression growing more concerned. "The first puppy is positioned incorrectly. It's breech, and Luna doesn't have the strength for a difficult delivery." He looked up at Sarah. "We need to get her to the clinic. Now. She needs an emergency C-section." The trip to the clinic was a blur. Luna whimpering in the back seat of Dr. Evans' SUV, Sarah beside her, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow against the fear gripping her throat. Eleanor followed in a taxi, her hands clutching her cane so tightly her knuckles showed white. At the clinic, a team was already waiting, alerted by Dr. Evans' call ahead. They whisked Luna into surgery, leaving Sarah and Eleanor in the sterile waiting room, the air heavy with antiseptic and dread. "The bill for this will be astronomical," Sarah whispered, staring at the closed doors through which Luna had disappeared. "Even with Eleanor's savings." "Money is just money," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "Lives are what matter." They sat in tense silence, minutes stretching like hours. Sarah's mind raced through worst-case scenarios, each more devastating than the last. She'd seen enough trauma, enough death in Iraq to know how quickly situations could deteriorate, how thin the line between life and loss. Eleanor reached over, her papery hand covering Sarah's. "She's a fighter, that one. Survived abuse, abandonment, and God knows what else. She won't give up now." The clinic doors opened, but it wasn't Dr. Evans who entered. It was Robert Callahan, his face drawn with worry. "Detective Peterson called me," he explained. "Said Luna, Athena, was in distress." Sarah nodded, too exhausted for surprise. "Emergency C-section. The first puppy was breech." Callahan sat across from them, his large frame awkward in the small waiting room chair. "She survived a landslide that killed 4 people, he said quietly. "Worked for 36 hours straight without rest, found 3 survivors buried under rubble when we were about to call off the search." His eyes met Sarah's. "If any dog can make it through this, it's her." A new voice joined the conversation. "So, the mighty search and rescue hero ends up like this. Pathetic." All 3 turned to see James Reynolds standing in the clinic doorway, a sneer distorting his otherwise handsome features. Sarah was on her feet instantly, fury displacing fear. "You have no right to be here." Reynolds ignored her, eyes fixed on Callahan. "So you're the one claiming my dog? Good luck with that. I've got registration papers, vet records." "You got a warrant out for your arrest is what you've got?" Detective Peterson appeared behind Reynolds, badge in hand. "Animal cruelty, fraud, theft of government property. Turn around, hands behind your back." Reynolds's face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. It's just a dog." "That just a dog saved 11 lives, Callahan said, rising to his full height. "She's a decorated service animal worth more than you'll ever be." As Detective Peterson handcuffed a protesting Reynolds, Sarah noticed something odd. Despite his anger, despite his claims of ownership, there was something else in Reynolds' eyes when he looked toward the surgical doors, something that looked almost like guilt or grief. Before she could process this, Dr. Evans emerged, surgical mask pulled down around his neck. His scrubs splattered with blood. Sarah's heart stopped, the world narrowing to his exhausted face, searching for signs of good news or bad. "She's stable," he said immediately. recognizing the panic in Sarah's eyes. The surgery was complicated. The first puppy was indeed breech, and 2 others were tangled in the birth canal. Luna's uterine wall was dangerously thin, likely from previous overbreeding and malnutrition. "And the puppies?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Evans' expression softened. 7 puppies, all alive. 5 females, 2 males. They'll need intensive care. They're underweight and premature, but they have a fighting chance. The relief was so intense, Sarah had to sit down, her legs suddenly unable to support her. 7 lives, plus Luna's, all saved. "Can we see her?" she asked. "Briefly," Dr. Evans cautioned. "She's still under anesthesia, and when she wakes, she'll be disoriented and in pain. The next 24 hours are critical." As Detective Peterson led a subdued Reynolds away, the man suddenly stopped, looking back at Sarah. "My brother," he said, his voice different now, hollow, almost broken. "He was in that landslide in Montana. They said the dogs couldn't find him in time." The pieces suddenly clicked into place in Sarah's mind. "You blamed her?" she said softly. "You blamed Luna for not saving him." Reynolds' jaw clenched. The mighty search and rescue dog. Everyone called her a hero. But she didn't find Tim. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I recognized her at a shelter 3 years ago. Thought it was fate." "So, you punished her," Sarah said, disgust rising in her throat. "Tortured her for something that wasn't her fault." "I was drunk the first time I heard her," Reynolds said, looking away. "After that, it became a way to deal with the pain. I know it was wrong." "Knowing doesn't make it right," Callahan said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "That dog worked until she collapsed looking for survivors. She didn't choose who to find or who to miss." Reynolds had no response to that, allowing Detective Peterson to guide him away. Sarah felt no satisfaction watching him go, only a deep sadness at the broken chain of tragedy that had led to this moment. The recovery room was dimly lit and warm, the soft beep of monitors creating a rhythmic backdrop. Luna lay on her side on a padded table, an IV in her foreleg, her shaved belly stitched with a long incision. Nearby, in a special heated enclosure, 7 tiny puppies squirmed and squeaked, each no bigger than Sarah's hand, their eyes still sealed shut, their coats damp and dark. Sarah approached Luna slowly, her heart clenching at how small and vulnerable the powerful dog looked under the surgical draping. She gently touched Luna's head, feeling the soft fur between her ears. "You did it," she whispered. "They're all here. They're beautiful." One of the veterinary technicians, a young woman with kind eyes, approached. "Would you like to hold one?" she offered. "It's good for them to have human contact early, and they'll need to be fed soon. Luna won't be able to nurse them right away." Sarah nodded, speechless, as the technician carefully lifted the smallest puppy, a female with a white patch on her chest, and placed her in Sarah's cupped hands. The tiny creature weighed almost nothing, her entire body fitting in Sarah's palm, her miniature paws flexing against the air. "Hello, little one," Sarah murmured, bringing the puppy close to her face. The scent was indescribable, new life, pure and untouched by the world's cruelty. Eleanor and Callahan took turns holding the puppies, each lost in their own thoughts. The gravity of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. These 7 tiny lives, against all odds, had made it into the world. Dr. Evans returned, reviewing Luna's vital signs. "Her temperature is elevated, but that's to be expected after surgery. The real challenge starts when she wakes up. She'll be in pain, confused, and may not recognize the puppies as hers immediately." "What can we do?" Sarah asked. "Stay with her," Dr. Evans advised. "A familiar presence will help. Talk to her, let her know you're here. As for the puppies, they'll need bottle feeding every 2 hours until Luna is able to nurse them, if she can at all." The reality of the situation began to sink in. 7 newborn puppies requiring round-the-clock care. Luna recovering from major surgery, the astronomical medical bills mounting by the hour, and hanging over everything, the question of what would happen when Luna was well enough to travel back to Montana with Callahan. Dr. Evans seemed to read her thoughts. "Let's focus on getting through the next 24 hours, he said gently. "The rest will sort itself out." As evening fell, Sarah settled into a chair beside Luna's recovery bed, prepared for a long night. Eleanor had reluctantly gone home to rest, promising to return in the morning. Callahan had taken a room at a nearby hotel, but insisted on helping with the first feeding of the puppies before he left. Watching him expertly handle the tiny bottle, Sarah asked, "You've done this before?" Callahan nodded, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the squirming puppy. "My wife and I breed German Shepherds. Well, she does most of the work. I'm deployed too often with the rescue unit." A shadow crossed his face. "Athena was from our first litter. I trained her myself from 8 weeks old." "You must have been devastated when she disappeared," Sarah said quietly. "We thought she was dead," Callahan replied, his voice roughening. "There was a secondary slide. 2 of our team were caught in it. Athena was working ahead of us, tracking a scent." He carefully returned the puppy to the heated enclosure and picked up another. "By the time we could search, there was no sign of her. We had to evacuate due to unstable conditions." He looked at Luna's sleeping form. 3 years I've blamed myself for leaving her behind. And all this time—" His voice trailed off. "You couldn't have known," Sarah said. "Neither could Reynolds, in a way," Callahan said surprisingly. "Grief does strange things to people. Doesn't excuse what he did, but—" He shook his head. "The whole thing is just tragic all around." The conversation lapsed into silence as they continued feeding the puppies. When all 7 were fed, Callahan reluctantly prepared to leave. "I'll be back first thing in the morning," he promised. "Call me if there's any change." He paused at the door. "Thank you, Sarah, for finding her, for saving her." Not everyone would have stopped. After he left, Sarah was alone with Luna and the puppies, the quiet of the clinic broken only by the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional squeak from the enclosure. She pulled her chair closer to Luna's bed, gently resting her hand on the dog's rising and falling side. "We made it this far," she whispered. "Just a little further now." As if in response, Luna's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Her amber gaze was unfocused at first, cloudy with anesthesia and pain. A low whine escaped her throat as she tried to move and felt the pull of her stitches. "Easy," Sarah soothed. "You're okay. You're safe." Luna's eyes found Sarah's face, recognition dawning slowly. Her tail thumped once against the bed, a weak gesture, but unmistakable. Then her head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as the scent of her puppies reached her. "They're here," Sarah told her, carefully lifting one of the puppies and bringing it close enough for Luna to see and smell, but not disturb her stitches. "All 7 of them. You did so well." Luna's eyes fixed on the tiny creature, something primal and profound passing through her gaze. She whined again, this time with clear intent, trying to reach the puppy. "Soon," Sarah promised, returning the puppy to its siblings. "When you're stronger." As Luna settled back, seeming to understand, Sarah felt a strange peace descend. Whatever happened next, with Callahan, with Montana, with her own uncertain future, this moment was worth everything. 7 new lives in the world. 1 brave mother, safe at last. For now, that was enough. The night crawled by in 2-hour increments, marked by the careful feeding of 7 tiny, demanding lives. Sarah moved between Luna's bedside and the puppy enclosure, her body operating on autopilot, fueled by hospital coffee and sheer determination. Luna drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain medication keeping her subdued but also preventing her from fully recognizing her situation. Around 2 a.m., Dr. Evans checked in, his face lined with fatigue from his own long day. "How is she?" he asked, reviewing Luna's charts. "Restless," Sarah answered, rubbing her burning eyes. "She keeps trying to reach the puppies." Dr. Evans nodded, examining Luna's surgical site. "That's actually a good sign. Her maternal instincts are strong despite everything." He frowned slightly as he took Luna's temperature. "She's running a fever. Not uncommon after surgery, but we need to monitor it closely." Sarah felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach. "Is it serious?" "Could be nothing," Dr. Evans said, adjusting Luna's IV drip, "or it could be the beginning of an infection. The next few hours will tell us." He squeezed Sarah's shoulder gently. "Try to get some rest. There's a cot in the break room." But Sarah couldn't bring herself to leave. Even after Dr. Evans departed with promises to return at dawn, she remained beside Luna, one hand resting on the dog's shoulder, feeling each labored breath. The quiet of the clinic at night was eerie. Just the hum of machines and the occasional distant sound of the overnight staff. "You have to fight," Sarah whispered to Luna. "Those babies need you. I need you." Luna's eyes flickered open at the sound of her voice, cloudy with pain and confusion. She whined softly, a sound of distress that tore at Sarah's heart. Then, as if the effort was too much, her eyes drifted closed again. Sarah checked her watch. Time for another round of puppy feedings. She forced herself to her feet, swaying slightly with exhaustion, and moved to the enclosure. One by one, she fed the tiny creatures, marveling at their will to live despite their precarious start. The smallest one, the female with the white chest patch whom Sarah had privately begun calling Star, seemed weaker than before, her suckling reflex diminished. "Come on, little one," Sarah coaxed, gently rubbing the puppy's throat to encourage swallowing. "Just a little more." The puppy took a few more drops before turning away from the bottle entirely. Concerned, Sarah held the tiny body close, feeling the rapid heartbeat against her palm. Too rapid. She glanced at Luna, then back at the struggling puppy, an impossible choice forming in her mind. Newborn puppies needed their mother's warmth, her scent, her presence to thrive. But Luna was fighting her own battle, her body too weak to properly care for her offspring. The clinic's incubator was a poor substitute for a mother's touch. Making a decision, Sarah carefully placed Star on the blanket beside Luna's face, close enough for the mother to smell and see her puppy, but not so close that Luna might accidentally hurt her in her medicated state. Luna's nostrils flared as the scent of her offspring reached her. Her eyes opened, more alert than they'd been all night. She stared at the tiny puppy, who was blindly nuzzling toward the warmth of her mother's breath. With visible effort, Luna stretched her neck, gently touching her nose to the puppy's body. Something changed in Luna's eyes then, a clarity, a purpose, cutting through the haze of pain and medication. She began to lick the puppy, weak, delicate strokes at first, then with growing vigor. The puppy responded, her tiny body seeming to strengthen under her mother's attention. Encouraged, Sarah carefully brought each puppy over for the same treatment, watching in awe as Luna's maternal instincts overcame her physical distress. When all 7 had received their mother's attention, Sarah arranged them in a special padded box beside Luna's bed, where she could see and smell them without risking her surgical wounds. The change in Luna was immediate and profound. Her eyes remained open, fixed on her puppies, a new determination evident in her gaze. She seemed to be fighting the sedation now, trying to stay present for her offspring. "That's it," Sarah encouraged, her own exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "They need you, Luna. Stay with us." The hours passed, each puppy feeding becoming a joint effort, Sarah with the bottle, Luna with the cleaning and stimulation afterward. By dawn, even little Star was nursing more strongly, responding to her mother's attentions. When Dr. Evans returned at first light, his eyebrows rose in surprise at the scene. "This is unconventional," he said, noting the puppy's proximity to Luna. "But it's working," Sarah pointed out. "Her fever's down and the puppies are stronger." Dr. Evans checked Luna's vitals, his expression gradually shifting from concern to cautious optimism. "You're right. Her numbers are improving." He gave Sarah a curious look. "Most owners would have gone home hours ago." "I'm not most owners," Sarah replied simply. "No," Dr. Evans agreed with a small smile, "you certainly aren't." Eleanor arrived shortly after, bringing fresh clothes for Sarah and homemade muffins for the clinic staff. She took one look at Sarah's exhausted face and clicked her tongue in disapproval. "You haven't slept a wink, have you?" she chided, though her eyes were soft with understanding. "Couldn't," Sarah admitted. Eleanor settled into the chair Sarah had vacated, her aged hands reaching out to gently stroke Luna's head. "Frank used to say there are two kinds of tired, one that requires sleep and one that requires peace." She studied Sarah's face. "You've got both, dear." Before Sarah could respond, Luna's monitors began to beep erratically. The dog's body suddenly stiffened, a strangled sound escaping her throat. "Dr. Evans!" Sarah called, panic surging through her fatigue. The veterinarian rushed in, immediately assessing the situation. "She's crashing," he said tersely, calling for his team. "Her body's going into shock, possible internal bleeding." Everything happened at once. Nurses rushing in, the puppies being whisked away to their incubator, Luna's still form being wheeled toward the surgical suite. Sarah stood frozen, unable to process the sudden shift from hope to crisis. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the commotion. "She was getting better." Dr. Evans paused at the door, his face grim. "Postpartum complications. Possibly a blood clot or hemorrhage from weakened tissue. We need to go back in immediately." "Save her," Sarah pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please." As Luna disappeared through the doors, Sarah felt her legs give way. Eleanor was there instantly, her frail body somehow strong enough to guide Sarah to a chair. "Breathe, dear," she instructed, her voice calm despite the fear in her eyes. "Just breathe." But Sarah couldn't breathe. The air seemed to have solidified in her lungs, her chest constricting with the familiar weight of impending panic, a sensation she hadn't felt since her worst days after Iraq. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision as memories crashed over her. The field hospital, the sounds of monitors flatlining, the knowledge that sometimes, no matter how hard you fought, you lost. "Sarah!" Eleanor's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Sarah, look at me!" With tremendous effort, Sarah focused on Eleanor's lined face, on the deep brown eyes that had witnessed nearly 8 decades of life's joys and sorrows. "That's it," Eleanor encouraged. "Now breathe with me, in and out." Again. Slowly, the roaring in Sarah's ears subsided. The clinic waiting room came back into focus, the sterile white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, Eleanor's concerned face. "I can't lose her," Sarah whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Not now, not after everything." Eleanor took Sarah's hands in her own weathered ones. "I know, dear, I know." Robert Callahan arrived during the second hour of waiting, his face etched with concern as Eleanor explained the situation. He sat heavily in a chair across from them, his large frame seeming to collapse in on itself. "I should never have left last night," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. "You couldn't have known. Sarah said automatically, the same words he'd offered her just hours before. The three sat in strained silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their own prayers or wishes or desperate bargains with fate. Sarah found herself making promises to whatever power might be listening, promises about what she'd do, how she'd live, if only Luna survived. The surgical doors remained closed, the minutes stretching into a third hour. Staff members passed by with sympathetic glances, but no information. The puppies needed feeding again, a task Sarah performed mechanically, her mind still in that operating room with Luna. When Dr. Evans finally emerged, his scrub splattered with blood, his face gray with exhaustion, Sarah knew before he spoke. Her world narrowed to his approaching footsteps, to the grim set of his mouth, to the weight of what was coming. "We lost her," Dr. Evans began, his voice heavy with defeat. "There was a massive hemorrhage from the uterine wall, too much damage from years of forced breeding and malnutrition. We tried everything, but—" He shook his head. "I'm so sorry." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Lost her. Hemorrhage. Sorry. Simple words forming an unbearable reality. Beside her, Eleanor made a small, broken sound. Not quite a sob, but the vocalization of a heart breaking. Callahan sat motionless, his face blank with shock. "Can I see her?" Sarah asked, her voice coming from somewhere outside herself. Dr. Evans nodded. "Of course, we've cleaned her up. You can take as much time as you need." Sarah stood on legs that didn't feel like her own, following Dr. Evans through the doors that had swallowed Luna hours before. The surgical suite was quiet now, the frantic energy of life-saving efforts replaced by the stillness of aftermath. On the table lay Luna, her body still, the machines silent around her. Approaching slowly, Sarah placed a trembling hand on Luna's head. The fur was still warm, creating the cruel illusion that she might just be sleeping. The surgical drape had been arranged neatly over her body, hiding the evidence of the desperate battle to save her. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, tears blurring her vision. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you better." The words felt inadequate against the magnitude of her grief, against the cruelty of a world that would allow a creature to survive such abuse only to die when freedom was finally within reach. She thought of the puppies, now motherless, their chances of survival dramatically reduced despite the best veterinary care. She thought of Eleanor, who had invested not just her savings but her heart in Luna's recovery. She thought of Callahan, who had found his lost partner only to lose her again in the span of a day. So much loss, so much pain. And for what? Sarah didn't know how long she stood there, one hand on Luna's cooling body, tears falling unchecked. She was vaguely aware of Eleanor entering, of the older woman's quiet weeping, of Callahan's stoic presence by the door. The three unlikely companions united in grief for a dog who had, in different ways, saved each of them. Then, beneath her palm, Sarah felt it. So faint she thought she'd imagined it, a flutter, a twitch of muscle that shouldn't be possible. She froze, hardly daring to breathe. There it was again, stronger this time, unmistakable. "Dr. Evans!" Sarah called, her voice cracking. "Dr. Evans, come quickly!" The veterinarian rushed in, confusion written across his exhausted face. "She moved," Sarah said, knowing how it sounded, the desperate denial of a grieving owner. "I swear, under my hand she moved." Dr. Evans approached, his expression gentle but skeptical. He placed his stethoscope on Luna's chest, a courtesy to Sarah's distress rather than medical necessity. His eyes widened. "That's impossible," he breathed, pressing the stethoscope more firmly against Luna's ribcage. "She was gone. We called it. She was—" He looked up at Sarah, disbelief warring with professional certainty. "There's a heartbeat." Everything became a blur of activity once more. Monitors reattached, IV lines reconnected, Dr. Evans barking orders to his stunned staff. Sarah found herself pushed back to the periphery, watching as Luna, impossibly, miraculously, was returned to the world of the living. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Evans said, checking Luna's pupils with a pen light. She was clinically dead for almost 7 minutes. No heartbeat, no respiration. "But she's back now?" Sarah asked, afraid to hope. Dr. Evans' expression was cautious. "Her heart is beating. She's breathing with assistance, but after that kind of trauma, that kind of oxygen deprivation to the brain—" He paused. "Even if she survives, she may not be the same dog you knew." Sarah looked at Luna's still form, now surrounded by life support equipment. "She fought her way back," she said softly. "After everything, the abuse, the abandonment, the surgery, she's still fighting." Eleanor took Sarah's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Some souls are just too stubborn to let go," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Too much love left to give." As the day wore on, Luna remained in critical condition, hovering in the liminal space between life and death. The puppies were brought to her one by one, their tiny bodies placed near her head where she could smell them, even in unconsciousness. Each time her vital signs would temporarily strengthen, as if their presence tethered her to life. Night fell again, finding Sarah still at the clinic, still maintaining her vigil. Eleanor had reluctantly gone home to rest, promising to return in the morning. Callahan had taken over the puppy feedings, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the tiny bottles. In the quiet darkness of the recovery room, Sarah sat beside Luna, holding her paw in one hand while she stroked her head with the other. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and Luna's assisted breathing. "I don't know if you can hear me," Sarah whispered, "but I need you to keep fighting. Your puppies need you. We all need you." She swallowed hard. "You found your way back from death itself. You can find your way back to us." Luna remained still, giving no sign that she heard or understood. But the monitors continued their steady rhythm, each beep a small victory against the impossible odds. And in that sterile room, surrounded by machines and uncertainty, Sarah finally allowed herself to do what she hadn't done since Iraq. She prayed. Not to any specific deity or power, but to whatever force had brought Luna back from the void, to whatever spark of life refused to be extinguished in that scarred and battered body. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, "please let her stay." Dawn broke over Phoenix with the muted colors of a watercolor painting, pale light filtering through the clinic's blinds to touch Luna's still form. Sarah blinked awake, momentarily disoriented, her neck stiff from falling asleep in the chair beside Luna's bed. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, each beep a reminder that, against all odds, Luna was still fighting. Dr. Evans arrived early, his face showing the strain of the past 24 hours. He checked Luna's vitals with methodical precision, his expression giving away nothing until he completed his examination. "Her condition has stabilized," he finally said, updating the chart. "Remarkable, given what happened yesterday." "Is she going to wake up?" Sarah asked, the question that had haunted her through the night. Dr. Evans's expression softened. "I wish I could give you certainty, but medicine rarely allows that luxury. Her body is healing, but the neurological impact of oxygen deprivation." He paused. "We just don't know yet." Sarah nodded, having expected this answer. She'd seen enough trauma cases in Iraq to understand the precarious nature of recovery, the fine line between medical miracles and prolonged suffering. "The puppies are doing well, all things considered," Dr. Evans added, offering what comfort he could. "Especially the little one with the white chest patch. She's quite the fighter." "Like her mother," Sarah said softly. Eleanor arrived shortly after, bearing fresh coffee and a change of clothes for Sarah. She took one look at Luna and nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "She's still with us," she declared, setting her bags down. "Frank always said shepherds are too stubborn to give up without having the last word." Sarah attempted a smile, grateful for Eleanor's unwavering optimism. "Doctor Evans says she's stable, but they don't know when or if she'll wake up." Eleanor settled into the chair opposite Sarah, her aged hands smoothing her skirt with habitual neatness. "Did I ever tell you about my stroke?" she asked unexpectedly. Sarah looked up, surprised. "No. Happened 6 years ago. The doctors told Frank I might never wake up, and if I did, I'd likely never speak again." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. 3 days later, I opened my eyes and asked for a cup of decent coffee instead of the hospital swill. Nearly gave Frank a heart attack." Despite everything, Sarah laughed softly. "Somehow that doesn't surprise me." "The point is," Eleanor continued, "doctors work with science and probabilities. But living things, we work with something else entirely." She leaned forward to gently stroke Luna's ear. "Something science hasn't quite figured out how to measure." Throughout the day, a steady stream of visitors came to check on Luna. Robert Callahan brought updates about the puppies, who were now under the care of a specialized neonatal veterinary team. Detective Peterson stopped by with news that James Reynolds had been formally charged with animal cruelty and theft, the evidence of Luna's past as Athena providing the final proof needed. "He's talking about a plea deal," Peterson informed them, offering information on an illegal breeding operation in exchange for reduced charges. "Will he serve time?" Sarah asked. Peterson nodded. "The DA is pushing for it. Animal cruelty laws have been strengthened in Arizona recently. Plus, with Athena's status as a former service animal, there are additional federal charges." Sarah felt no satisfaction at this news. Justice for Luna was important, but it wouldn't heal her wounds or guarantee her recovery. It wouldn't erase the years of abuse or bring back the time she'd lost. As evening approached, Dr. Evans suggested that Sarah go home to rest properly. "You can't help her if you collapse," he said gently. "We'll call immediately if there's any change." Sarah was reluctant, but Eleanor was insistent. "You need a real shower, a hot meal, and a proper bed," she declared. "I'm not taking no for an answer." Back at Eleanor's apartment, Sarah found herself standing in the shower, hot water cascading over her exhausted body as days of tension and fear finally overwhelmed her. She wept until the water ran cold, purging emotions she'd kept tightly contained since finding Luna in that parking lot. Afterward, dressed in clean clothes, she joined Eleanor in the kitchen, where the older woman was stirring a pot of homemade soup. "Frank's recipe," Eleanor explained, ladling the fragrant liquid into bowls. "Chicken soup with a kick. His secret was a dash of cayenne." They ate in companionable silence, the events of the past days hanging between them like a shared weight. When they finished, Eleanor fixed Sarah with a penetrating gaze. "What happens if she wakes up?" she asked directly. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Callahan has a legal claim to her. She is his search and rescue dog. Will you fight for her?" The question struck at the heart of Sarah's unspoken fears. She'd been so focused on Luna's survival that she hadn't allowed herself to think beyond it, to confront the reality that saving Luna might mean losing her. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice small. "Legally, he has every right, and he clearly loves her. She was trained for important work, saving lives." Eleanor nodded, considering this. "And what about you? What will you do if she goes back to Montana?" The thought created a physical ache in Sarah's chest. In the short time since finding Luna, the dog had become the center of her world, a purpose when she'd been drifting. The prospect of returning to her empty life, no job, no Luna, no purpose, was almost unbearable. "I'll figure something out," she said, the words hollow even to her own ears. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then reached for her cane, using it to lever herself up from the table. "Come with me," she said. "There's something I want to show you." Curious, Sarah followed Eleanor down the hallway to a door she hadn't opened before. Frank's study, the room that had remained untouched since his death. Eleanor hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, then pushed it open. Inside was a carefully preserved workspace. Bookshelves lined with veterinary texts, framed certificates on the walls, a solid oak desk with a leather chair. Frank was a veterinarian, Eleanor explained, running her hand along the desk's polished surface. Specialized in working dogs, police, canines, service animals, search and rescue. That's how we met, actually. I was a vet tech at the same clinic. Sarah looked around in amazement, suddenly understanding Eleanor's knowledgeable care of Luna, her easy familiarity with medical terminology. "He would have liked you," Eleanor continued, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Your dedication to Luna, your willingness to fight for her, that would have impressed him." She moved to a filing cabinet, opening the top drawer and removing a thick folder. "After Frank died, I kept all his contacts, his professional network. I couldn't bear to throw anything away." She handed the folder to Sarah. "Inside are names, numbers, emails, everyone in the veterinary world who respected Frank Whitman." Sarah accepted the folder, confused. "I don't understand." Eleanor's eyes were bright with purpose. "You need a job. The veterinary world needs people who care like you do, who fight like you do." She gestured to the folder. "It won't be easy. You'll need certification, training. But you've got medical background, and more importantly, you've got heart." The suggestion was so unexpected, so perfectly aligned with the undefined yearning Sarah had been feeling, that she couldn't immediately respond. A new direction, a purpose that honored both her medical training and her newfound passion for animal welfare. It seemed too perfectly tailored to be coincidence. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you do this for me?" Eleanor's smile was tinged with sadness. "Because Frank would have... Because you saved not just Luna, but me, too." She gestured around the apartment. "I was existing, not living. You brought life back into these rooms." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang, Dr. Evans's number flashing on the screen. Her heart lurched as she answered, Eleanor watching anxiously. "Sarah?" Dr. Evans' voice was taut with urgency. "You need to come back to the clinic, now." "Is she—" Sarah couldn't finish the question. "She's waking up," Dr. Evans said. "But she's agitated, disoriented. She's not responding well to the staff. We think she might respond better to you." Sarah was already moving, grabbing her keys, Eleanor right behind her. "We're on our way," she said, ending the call. The drive to the clinic was a blur, Sarah's mind racing with possibilities. Luna was waking up, a miracle in itself, but agitated and disoriented suggested potential neurological damage, the very complication Dr. Evans had feared. When they arrived, the clinic was in a state of controlled chaos. Luna was awake, truly awake, her eyes open and alert, but her body thrashing against the restraints necessary to protect her surgical wound. Two vet techs were trying to calm her, but she growled and snapped, wild with fear or confusion or both. "Thank God you're here," Dr. Evans said, meeting them at the door. "She's been like this for 20 minutes. We can't sedate her heavily because of her condition, but she's going to tear her stitches if we can't calm her down." Sarah approached the table cautiously, her heart breaking at the sight of Luna's panic. The dog's eyes were wide with terror, not recognizing her surroundings or the people trying to help her. "Luna," Sarah called softly. "Luna, it's me. It's Sarah." The dog's head whipped toward her voice, ears pricked forward. For a moment there was no recognition in those amber eyes, just the wild fear of a cornered animal. Sarah felt her hopes crumbling. Was Luna's mind damaged beyond repair? Would she ever remember? "Back up!" Callahan's voice came from behind them. He had arrived at the clinic shortly after them and now stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "All of you, back away from her." Dr. Evans began to protest, but Callahan silenced him with a raised hand. "Trust me. I trained her." Reluctantly, the medical staff stepped back. Sarah remained frozen, unwilling to abandon Luna in her distress. "You too, Sarah," Callahan said gently. "Just for a moment." With painful effort, Sarah moved away from the table. Luna's eyes followed her, still wild but perhaps less frantic. Callahan stepped forward, his movements measured and confident. He stopped several feet from Luna and assumed a specific stance. Feet planted, shoulders squared. "Athena," he said, his voice pitched lower than his normal speaking tone. "Status report." The change in Luna was immediate and astonishing. Her body stilled, her ears perked forward, her focus entirely on Callahan. It was as if a switch had been flipped, the panicked animal replaced by a trained professional. "It's a command phrase," Callahan explained quietly to the others. "Part of her search and rescue training. It puts her in work mode, calm, focused, waiting for instructions." Luna, or Athena, continued to watch Callahan, her breathing steadier, her posture alert despite her weakened condition. "Good girl," Callahan said, his voice thick with emotion. "At ease." The command released Luna from her rigid attention, but she remained calm, her eyes now moving between Callahan and Sarah. Confusion evident, but panic subsided. "Now," Callahan said to Sarah, "approach slowly. Let her process who you are." Sarah moved forward carefully, keeping her movements smooth and predictable. "Luna?" she called softly. "It's me. You're safe now." Luna watched her approach, head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as she took in Sarah's scent. There was a moment of tense uncertainty, and then, like sunshine breaking through clouds, recognition dawned in those amber eyes. Luna's tail thumped weakly against the table. "She knows you," Callahan said, wonder in his voice. "Even after everything she remembers?" Sarah reached Luna's side, gently stroking the fur between her ears. "Hey there, brave girl," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Welcome back." Dr. Evans approached cautiously, amazement written across his features. "Her neurological responses seem intact," he observed. "This is remarkable." Over the next hour, Luna continued to improve, each moment bringing more awareness, more of her personality returning. She accepted water from Sarah's hand, allowed Dr. Evans to examine her wounds, and even took a small piece of chicken, her first food since the surgery. The puppies were brought in one by one, Luna's eyes following each tiny bundle with intense focus. She whined softly when they were near, but seemed to understand she couldn't nurse them yet. The maternal recognition was there, another piece of herself recovered from the void. As the initial excitement of Luna's awakening settled into cautious optimism, Sarah found herself standing with Callahan by the window, watching as Eleanor sat beside Luna, telling her stories about Frank's veterinary adventures as if the dog could understand every word. "She doesn't see Athena when she looks at her," Callahan observed quietly. "She sees Luna." Sarah glanced at him, uncertain where he was going with this observation. "Is that wrong?" Callahan shook his head slowly. "No. It's just different." He turned to face Sarah fully. "I came here ready to take her back to Montana. I had it all planned. Her rehabilitation, her gradual return to work. My wife has already prepared our home for her." Sarah felt her throat tighten. of course. This was the inevitable moment when Luna, Athena, would be taken from her life as suddenly as she had entered it. "She's your dog," she managed to say. "You trained her." "She clearly responds to you." "She was my dog," Callahan corrected gently. "But the Athena I knew died in that landslide 3 years ago. The dog that came back, Luna, she's someone new." He gazed at Luna, his expression complex. "Those commands still work. That training is still there. But something fundamental has changed." Sarah followed his gaze to where Luna lay, watching Eleanor with attentive eyes. "What do you mean?" "In search and rescue, the bond between handler and dog is everything," Callahan explained. "Athena was my partner, but she was also a working dog with a job to do. Her purpose was saving others." He paused. "The way she looks at you, that's different. That's not duty or training. That's choice." The implication of his words slowly dawned on Sarah. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I need to think about what's best for her, not just what I want," Callahan said. "And I'm not sure Montana is it anymore." Before their conversation could continue, Detective Peterson arrived, his expression unusually animated. "I thought you'd want to know immediately," he said, approaching their small group. "We've been going through Reynolds' computer files. There's something you need to see." He handed Sarah a printout. An email chain between Reynolds and someone named Marcus Delgado, dated 3 years prior. Sarah scanned the messages, her confusion growing. "I don't understand," she said. "What is this?" "Delgado is a suspected animal trafficker," Peterson explained. "Specializes in stealing high-value service dogs and selling them to private buyers or illegal breeding operations." He pointed to specific lines in the email. "Reynolds didn't find Athena by chance. He paid Delgado $15,000 for her." Callahan took the printout, his face darkening as he read. "Delgado was one of the volunteer rescuers who showed up after the landslide," he said, his voice tight with anger. "He must have found Athena injured, taken her, then sold her to Reynolds." "There's more," Peterson continued. "Reynolds didn't abuse her initially. According to his statement, he was actually trying to retrain her for private security work. But when she wouldn't respond to his commands, wouldn't breed properly." He trailed off, the implications clear. "When did the abuse start?" Sarah asked quietly. "About a year after he got her," Peterson replied. "Around the time his brother's remains were finally recovered from the landslide site. Something seems to have snapped in him then." Eleanor, who had been listening silently, shook her head sadly. "Grief twisted into something ugly," she murmured. "Doesn't excuse it, but explains it." Luna watched them all with alert eyes, as if understanding they were discussing her past. When Sarah approached to stroke her head, she leaned into the touch, a gesture of trust that made Sarah's heart ache with its simplicity. "What happens now?" she asked, the question directed at everyone and no one in particular. "Now," Dr. Evans said, checking Luna's latest readings, "we focus on her recovery, one day at a time." He smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him in days. "But given what she's already survived, I'd say the prognosis is cautiously optimistic." As the others discussed treatment plans and legal proceedings, Sarah remained beside Luna, their eyes locked in a silent communication that transcended words. In those amber depths, Sarah saw not just pain and survival, but a profound connection. Two broken souls who had somehow found each other at exactly the right moment. Whatever happened next, whether Luna returned to Montana with Callahan or remained in Phoenix, whether Sarah pursued Eleanor's suggested career path or found another way forward, This connection would remain, transforming them both in ways neither could have imagined when they first met in that abandoned parking lot. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, pressing her forehead gently against Luna's. "For fighting. For staying." Luna's tail thumped once against the bed, a simple acknowledgement of a bond that had transcended death itself. Outside the window, the Phoenix sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and amber, the exact shade of Luna's knowing eyes as they watched over her 7 puppies, her unlikely human family, and the new future unfolding before them all. 1 year later, Sarah stood on the porch of the small ranch house, watching the Arizona sunset paint the desert landscape in shades of amber and gold. The modest property, 3 acres on the outskirts of Phoenix, had once seemed an impossible dream, yet here she was, coffee mug in hand, witnessing another day's end from her own front porch. "Penny for your thoughts," Eleanor called from the doorway, her silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Sarah smiled, turning to face the woman who had become family in every way that mattered. At 79, Eleanor moved a little slower now, her arthritis more pronounced in the desert evenings, but her eyes remained sharp and her spirit undiminished. "Just grateful," Sarah replied honestly. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed in a year." Eleanor nodded, understanding the weight behind those simple words. A year ago, Sarah had been unemployed, alone, and adrift. Now she was halfway through her veterinary technician certification, working at Dr. Evans' clinic and sharing this small ranch with Eleanor and an ever-growing family of 4-legged residents. The sound of paws on hardwood announced Luna's approach before she appeared in the doorway beside Eleanor. The German Shepherd moved with only the slightest hint of a limp, a remarkable recovery considering how close she had come to death. Her coat gleamed with health, the scars from her previous life still visible, but faded, like painful memories that had lost their sting. Behind Luna trailed 2 of her puppies, now grown into gangly adolescents, Star, with her distinctive white chest patch, and Max, the more reserved male who had inherited his mother's amber eyes and thoughtful demeanor. "The dynamic duo's looking for dinner," Eleanor observed with a smile. As if to confirm this, Star gave a soft, hopeful whine, her tail wagging in anticipation. Max, ever the gentleman, simply sat and waited, though his eyes followed every movement with keen intelligence. "They're always looking for dinner," Sarah laughed, checking her watch. "But it is that time. Want to help me feed the crew?" The crew had grown considerably over the past year. In addition to Luna and the 2 puppies they had kept, there were now 4 rescue dogs in various stages of rehabilitation, all former abuse cases that Dr. Evans had connected them with after seeing Sarah's natural gift with traumatized animals. What had begun as a temporary arrangement, Sarah and Eleanor pooling their resources to rent a small house where Luna could recover with her puppies, had evolved into something more permanent and purposeful. The Whitman Miller Second Chance Ranch, they called it informally, though there was nothing official about their operation yet. Just 2 women with complementary skills and a shared mission, helping animals that others had given up on. As they prepared dinner for their canine family, Sarah reflected on the winding path that had led them here. Luna's recovery had been arduous but steady, each milestone a small miracle. Her first steps, post-surgery, her first time playing with her puppies, her first run across the desert property when they'd moved in 6 months ago. 5 of the 7 puppies had been adopted into loving homes, carefully selected by Sarah and Eleanor with Luna's apparent approval. 1 had gone to Dr. Evans, whose own aging shepherd had passed shortly after Luna's surgery. Another had been adopted by Detective Peterson, who reported that the pup was showing remarkable aptitude for police work, a legacy of her mother's training. The most surprising adoption had been the rambunctious female with distinctive black markings, who now lived in Montana with Robert Callahan and his wife. The decision about Luna's own future had been difficult and emotional, with Callahan ultimately recognizing that separating her from Sarah would be traumatic for both. Instead of reclaiming Luna, he had chosen to take one of her puppies, a compromise that honored both Luna's past and her present. "You know what today is, don't you?" Eleanor asked, interrupting Sarah's thoughts as they filled food bowls. Sarah paused, mentally checking the calendar. "Tuesday?" Eleanor clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "1 year ago today, you found Luna in that parking lot. Your anniversary, in a way." Sarah set down the bag of premium dog food, surprised by the realization. "You're right. I didn't even think about it." "Well, I did," Eleanor said with a mysterious smile. "That's why I baked that cake in the fridge, and why I invited a few people over for dinner." "Eleanor!" Sarah exclaimed. "You should have told me. I would have helped." The older woman waved away her concern. "Nothing fancy, just Dr. Evans, Detective Peterson, and his wife, and—" She hesitated slightly. "Your ex-husband, Mike." Sarah stilled, her hand frozen in the act of reaching for another bowl. "Mike?" she repeated, certain she had misheard. "He called last week," Eleanor admitted. "Said he's been following Luna's story in the papers and wanted to see how you were doing. I took the liberty of inviting him." She fixed Sarah with an apologetic but determined look. "You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to. I can run interference, but I thought after a year maybe it was time." Sarah let out a slow breath, processing this unexpected development. Her relationship with Mike had ended painfully, his inability to understand her PTSD after Iraq creating a gulf neither could bridge. They hadn't spoken since finalizing their divorce 18 months ago. "It's fine," she said finally. "It'll be good to see him, actually." To her surprise, she meant it. The raw pain of their separation had faded, replaced by a calm acceptance that had come with her new purpose. The dinner party turned out to be exactly what Eleanor had promised. Nothing fancy, just good food and better company around the large farmhouse table that had been Frank's pride and joy. Dr. Evans brought wine and updates on the clinic's latest cases. Detective Peterson and his wife brought their puppy, now nearly full-grown and named Shadow, who was immediately welcomed into a rowdy play session with Luna's remaining offspring. Mike arrived last, standing awkwardly on the porch with a bouquet of wildflowers and an expression caught between hope and uncertainty. Sarah was struck by how little he had changed physically, still tall and solid, with kind eyes and the crooked smile that had once made her heart race. Yet something was different in the way he carried himself, a new humility perhaps. "You look good, Sarah," he said after the initial greetings. "Really good? Thanks," she replied, accepting the flowers. "So do you." There was an awkward pause before Luna appeared in the doorway, regarding Mike with intense curiosity. Sarah watched, fascinated, as the dog approached him cautiously, sniffing his extended hand before allowing him to stroke her head. "So this is the famous Luna," Mike said softly. "I've been following her story. The newspaper articles, the fundraiser for the clinic, the animal welfare bill they're calling Luna's Law." Sarah nodded, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "She's pretty special." "Like her owner," Mike said, then quickly corrected himself. "Sorry. Her person? Companion? Friend?" Sarah supplied with a small smile. "We're friends." The evening flowed more smoothly than Sarah had anticipated, the initial awkwardness giving way to genuine warmth as they shared a meal and stories. Luna moved between the guests, accepting affection from each but always returning to settle at Sarah's feet, her steadfast presence a comfort. After dinner, as they gathered on the porch with coffee and Eleanor's cake, Mike pulled Sarah aside, his expression serious. "I wanted to tell you something," he began, his voice low. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Sarah braced herself, uncertain what revelation might be coming. "When I was on that business trip 3 years ago, the one where I had the car accident," he continued, making air quotes around the words, "I wasn't entirely truthful about what happened." "I know," Sarah said gently. "You were in Montana during the landslide. Luna, or Athena as she was called then, helped rescue you." Mike's eyes widened in shock. "How did you—" "It's a long story," Sarah said, glancing at Luna, who had padded over to join them as if sensing she was being discussed. "Let's just say the world is smaller than we think." Mike shook his head in disbelief. "All this time, I had no idea it was the same dog. When I saw the articles about a rescued German shepherd named Luna, I never made the connection to Athena." "Why didn't you tell me about the landslide?" Sarah asked, the question she'd wondered about for months. "Why make up a story about a car accident?" Mike's gaze dropped to his hands. "I was trapped for almost 12 hours. Thought I was going to die. And when I was rescued, when that dog found me, I had a complete breakdown." He swallowed hard. "I was embarrassed, ashamed. You were a combat nurse, dealing with real trauma every day. I felt like my experience wasn't valid compared to what you'd been through." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. How their marriage had ultimately crumbled under the weight of her PTSD, which Mike couldn't understand, while he had been silently carrying his own trauma. "I wish you had told me," she said softly. "Maybe it would have helped us both to know we were struggling with similar demons." "Maybe," Mike agreed, regret evident in his voice. "But we can't change the past." He nodded toward Luna. "She saved my life once. Looks like she saved yours too, in a different way." Before Sarah could respond, Detective Peterson called them over, raising his glass in a toast. "To Luna," he proclaimed, "and to the remarkable women who refused to give up on her." As glasses clinked and Luna received an extra treat in celebration, Sarah found herself overwhelmed with a sense of rightness, as if all the broken pieces of her life had finally found their proper arrangement. Not perfect, certainly, but whole in a way she hadn't thought possible after Iraq, after the divorce, after everything. Later, as the guests departed one by one, Sarah found Eleanor in the kitchen wrapping leftover cake with meticulous care. "Thank you," Sarah said simply. "For tonight? For everything?" Eleanor smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "Frank always said life gives you exactly what you need, but rarely in the package you expect." She glanced toward Luna, who was supervising the younger dog's last trip outside before bedtime. "Sometimes it comes in a fur coat with 4 legs and a remarkable capacity for forgiveness." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. James Reynolds, recently released after serving 6 months for animal cruelty. His appearance at their gate sent Luna into a barking frenzy, her body rigid with memory while Sarah stood frozen in shock and anger. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Reynolds called from beyond the fence, keeping his distance. I needed to see that she's okay." Sarah approached the gate cautiously, signaling Luna to stay back. The man before her looked diminished somehow, thinner, grayer, the arrogance gone from his posture. His eyes, when they met hers, held something she hadn't seen before: remorse. "Why are you really here?" Sarah asked, making no move to open the gate. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "Part of my rehabilitation program is making amends where possible." He gestured vaguely toward Luna. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. To her, to you." Sarah studied him, looking for signs of deception but finding only awkward sincerity. "Luna's doing well," she said finally. "No thanks to you." He nodded, accepting the coldness in her tone. "I deserve that. I deserve worse." He reached into his pocket, producing an envelope which he extended through the fence rails. "This isn't much, but it's everything I got for selling the other dogs I bred from her. I thought maybe you could use it for the rescue work you're doing. The lady at the probation office told me about it." Sarah hesitated before taking the envelope, uncertain about accepting anything from this man who had caused so much suffering. Yet something in his expression, a desperate hope for some form of redemption, made her reach for it. "Thank you," she said, her voice neutral. Reynolds nodded again, his gaze moving to Luna, who watched him warily from the porch. "She really does look good," he said softly. "Better than she ever did with me." "She has a family now," Sarah replied. "People who care about her." "Good," Reynolds said, and seemed to mean it. "That's good." He started to turn away, then paused. "My brother, the one who died in the landslide, he loved dogs, had 3 rescues of his own. He would have hated what I did." His voice cracked slightly. "I lost myself for a while there. No excuse, just an explanation." As he walked back to his car, Sarah felt an unexpected wave of pity. Not forgiveness, she wasn't sure she would ever be capable of that, but a recognition of the complex chain of pain and loss that had led to Luna's suffering. The envelope, when she opened it, contained nearly $5,000 in cash and a handwritten note that simply said, "For second chances." That evening, as Sarah and Eleanor discussed how best to use the unexpected donation, Luna lay contentedly on the porch, watching her puppies play in the yard. The ranch was quiet except for the occasional bark or yip, the setting sun casting long shadows across the desert landscape. "I'm thinking we could make it official," Eleanor said, breaking a comfortable silence. "The Second Chance Ranch. Get proper nonprofit status, maybe expand a bit." Sarah considered the idea. They had already outgrown their modest beginning, with local shelters increasingly calling on them to take the most difficult cases. That would mean more work, more responsibility, she said cautiously. "More purpose," Eleanor countered. "More lives saved." She gestured toward Luna. "More stories like hers." Luna, as if sensing she was the topic of conversation, raised her head, those intelligent amber eyes moving between the 2 women who had become her family. In her gaze, Sarah saw not just trust and affection, but a profound understanding, as if Luna comprehended exactly what they were building together. "You know," Sarah said slowly, "when I found her in that parking lot, I thought I was saving her." She smiled, reaching down to stroke Luna's scarred but beautiful head. "I had no idea she was actually saving me." Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. "That's how it works with angels, dear. They never come with wings and halos. Sometimes they come with fur and 4 paws, and hearts big enough to forgive the unforgivable." As darkness fell over the desert, Luna moved to sit between them, her warm presence, a living bridge connecting past and future, loss and hope, endings and beginnings. The stars emerged one by one in the vast Arizona sky, bearing silent witness to the small miracle of healing that had unfolded beneath them, not just for a dog named Luna, but for all whose lives she had touched. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely voice carrying across the open land. Luna's ears perked up, but she made no move to leave her chosen post, her chosen family. She had found her home, just as Sarah and Eleanor had found theirs, in the most unexpected place, at the most unexpected time, in the most unexpected way. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all. When Sarah found Luna, abandoned and pregnant in that parking lot, she never imagined this broken German shepherd would transform her life. Like many of us facing life's 3rd act, Sarah was adrift, divorced, unemployed, and haunted by past trauma. But through her commitment to Luna, Sarah discovered healing isn't just for the young, it's for anyone brave enough to open their heart again. Eleanor, at 78, wasn't just Luna's caretaker, but a mentor who proved wisdom and purpose don't diminish with age. Together, they created Second Chance Ranch, where damaged souls, canine and human, find renewal. Luna's story reminds us that our most meaningful chapters often begin when we least expect them, sometimes in our silver years. Her journey from abused stray to beloved family member mirrors our own potential for reinvention. No matter our age, we can build something beautiful from brokenness. Every sunrise brings new possibilities for connection and purpose. Have you ever had an unexpected encounter that changed your life's direction? What second chance are you grateful for today? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might be the very inspiration someone else needs right now.